Well, dude, I'm glad to hear that basically you have a lot of great sales meetings going on and a lot of um, neat things in the works. I know that we are like obviously we have that new video or that um, that song that's going to come out and that for the intro for future podcasts here.
Yeah.
So you guys can stay tuned for that. But the rest of it, there's actually a few things coming up. So we will have Dylan uh, probably trying to decide if it should be a week episode or if it's just going to be sometime tomorrow. But that's going to be Patriot Payments. He's going to jump on, but helping him with some stuff and that. And if we can get a couple of the other guys, I'll be flying out to Denver here. Well, I'm not flying. I will be driving out to Denver, which is a lot less enjoyable.
So the
Uh,
speed that you drive is probably flying, the equivalent, right? Like,
when you're towing 20,000 pounds and that, it's not exactly you're not flying. And if you're flying, especially with 20,000 pounds on a bumper pull trailer, then you're an idiot. Um, it's just it's going to set you up for some really bad days,
yeah,
especially on
don't be
it.
doing that.
No, I took so I went up to Bear Lake actually for so there's a development property up in Fish Haven.
Hmm.
Um, called the Reserve, like really big multi-million dollar huge mansions, stuff like that. They rent them out for 4,500 a night, which
It's a
is
bargain.
I know absolute steal. And that like I don't I don't know if I'll ever get wealthy enough to that point where I just blow money like that. Like yeah, I don't care how much money I have in the account like that. Just that makes me nauseous. It's not one of my priorities. There's some people that they like that because everybody gets their own bedroom. They get their own like set of jet skis and stuff like that. There is other perks, and I mean you are clear up literally on the top of the mountain overlooking the entire lake, so that's awesome. Um, but yeah, I just for me, I'd much rather get the cheapy rink-a-dink and that as long as it has a comfy bed and great showers, I'm happy. Like
There you
I'm fine.
go.
But yeah,
What were you
so
doing up there? Were you doing some work up there or staying in?
yeah, so I had to drop off. I did a favor for a friend, um, dropping off one of our skid steers to go do some work and that. But I had that plus literally 8 pallets, and it was an excessive amount of weight. We'll just put that much.
Mm.
So I literally got three, like even in my big giant turbo diesel truck, and I was getting 3 miles a gallon the entire like both of the canyons.
No
uh,
kidding.
Going in there because yeah, Logan Canyon, especially on that
That
steep
is,
down
oh
incline
yeah.
into the valley.
Mhm. Up
Oh
by
yeah,
Beaver Mountain there.
I
That's
was
a
in the
climb.
lowest gear humanly possible, and I was still overheating my brakes.
Wow.
That tells you anything.
Yeah. In other words, no
I had to
thanks.
turn up that trailer brake game just a little bit. Anyways, so I think with this podcast, frankly, we're just going to do um, just kind of an overview on what we can do with it to implement some of the ideas and that we've discussed in the last episodes. So we've talked about obviously mind mapping, right? We've talked about putting in some processes, executing on that plan and everything. And then I don't really think that we've talked about necessarily the burning out, like avoiding burnout and making it sustainable. So it's the same thing as if you go into a diet, right? If you do a diet and you have to do all these weird anomaly bullshit, um, frankly, it's not sustainable. And as soon as you're off of it, you're either leading a very miserable life, right? Just basically having to get it to work, or and it's not even a great lifestyle because again, you're not getting great calories. You're basically starving yourself, or you're like you get off of it. You're saying screw that. It was just a temporary thing, and then you basically go right back up to where you were. Um, as far as your goals or lack of progress in that aspect. So I think that's the same thing, especially in business, is how can you realistically set something that is sustainable for yourself both from a business perspective and as an employee, right? Because I do think that there is that to be considered, especially when you are in a bigger company, or working in like Henry Schein with, you said, what, 700 sales agents?
Yep.
So it's very easy to become a number in that type of environment and basically give blood, sweat, and tears and barely be recognized ever, right? So, what is something that you can do to not only avoid burnout, but to gain recognition? And what have you seen in both that corporate structure as well as other corporate structures that have allowed you the opportunity to really to shine without burning out and to be recognized, but without becoming complacent, right? So I'll let you do yours first, and then I'll talk more from the business side.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because it's easy to become complacent. Real easy when you have the structure of be here at this time and leave at that time, right? It's just, there's people in organizations that that's good enough for them. They're there and they're stalwart and they are consistent and things there, but then it gets kind of mundane. At the same time, in different organizations I've worked at, I've seen where people just assume that they should be up next for a promotion or a special project or something, and then are quite taken back when they realize that so and so is the one working on that project or has been put in for that promotion or whatnot, and just kind of completely like flabbergasted why they didn't get chosen, yet at the same time did not put any extra effort into even communicating to the boss or whatnot, hey, I am interested in these types of things. And so it's it
It's
can
kind of that entitlement you're talking to, like the subtle entitlement that people have, just like, hey, I've been here longest, so I should
right.
get it. That deal, as opposed to, hey, I've put in this work, I've done this, I've told you I want this, and I feel like this kind of the next step and everything. Like, hey, this is the next step of progression. I know I can kill it in this project. Let me make this happen. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes there's a bit of loyalty there, right, to what you're doing there. And then or self-inflicted or unjustified, I think people might think, well, if I show that I want to grow or do something more or else other than this particular role or department, that might be seen as disloyal. When really it, I think, is actually a compliment to the organization, to yourself, and those managers over you, that you have mastered the skills that you need to succeed in that role, and that you're ready for the next thing. There's a quote that I've always admired that says that if you're not replaceable, you're not promotable. If you're not replaceable, you're not promotable. And so it's like, well, I got to be so busy during the hours that I'm here working that I can't possibly do anything else, so that I don't show that I'm not doing or pulling my weight. But really, if it's, you can get efficient at what you're doing, if you can become the expert at what you're doing, and part of that is building relationships or leveraging the relationship that you have within the organization to make your job easier, or helping customers get to where they need to go a heck of a lot faster with the questions and answers that they need, the more you're going to be able to free up a little bit of that time that you'd normally spend trying to just figure out which way is up and what you should do with something, on top of the workload or the email responses or the calls coming in or calls that you need to make. So the more you get efficient with that, the more it frees you up to say, okay, you know what? I've really actually mastered this. So I think it's a fine line between, hey, I'm getting burnt out in doing this, and hey, I'm pretty dang efficient at this. I've just released the next capacity in my mindset and my work ethic to grow into that next phase, that next level.
Well, and I do understand, even from an employee standpoint. I remember working at this one job as a CTO, and I pretty much automated my entire job. That was the problem. I put in the systems, I put in the processes, I did everything, created all these like automated workflows, everything else, to where everything functioned the way it should without like me stepping in or intervening. But they're like, "Hey, this, oh, awesome! I'm so great you did this and everything, um, but now we don't need you."
Mm-hmm. Sure. Like you
Um,
almost made it like too efficient, right?
Yeah.
And
And so
I
I understand that, and I think that what if I could go back to that time, I could have probably restructured and be like, well, here's my value, here's what I can still do for the long-term vision of the company and stuff like that. If I can do it with this, I can obviously do it moving forward as we progress as a company. Um, and luckily, I think honestly, what happened was the better call for me, um, because
sure.
it allowed me to transition out of that culture where I wasn't really appreciated. And it's not like they paid me for, all that time and that, because as CTO, whenever you're at a C-level position, it's more of a contract than it is necessarily a full W-2. They're like, hey, you're going to have at least this term agreement and everything to on where you're going to have this board position, if you will. At least in this, it's kind of how we had structured it. Um, so there was like there's always like the initial probationary term, and I think that's with most employers. They'll kind of do that initial warm up phase, see how well you do, how well you're executing on that, and then basically redetermine it at that point. And honestly, so here's the caveat though: when you put in that effort and then it's underappreciated or they just crap on it, either one of two things: either one, the effort wasn't as great as you thought it was, or
Could be.
two, they frankly just didn't value what you brought to the table. And so the communication of the value wasn't there, which means that you can choose to exist and be complacent in that. And I think it's called like settle for mediocrity, or you can go to a more of a company culture that then establishes and appreciates that more.
Right.
Right.
And I've experienced all of the above, right? I think many of us have. And yeah, what do you do when you get to that point? I think you also kind of touched on it from even a previous episode where you've met consultants or contractors or whatnot, where they're just there collecting that paycheck and they're just doing everything to kind of guard their turf, yet they're not bringing any value to the organization. And it sounds like in that example that you share, that maybe you maximize your capacity, you probably learn some lessons of being able to restructure that for the next time going forward. Of look at this massive value I brought in automating these things instead of working yourself out of a job. But
Well, it's the same thing with the security consultation that we do, right? So you can give enough value in a great like summary report that says, hey, here's an overview of your issues, but you don't have to give the secret sauce of, hey,
right,
this is exactly the directory where this issue is. And that, because I found out, especially when we would give that for free, um, it severely undermined what we were doing.
yeah, it's like, oh, you gave us that, okay, we're good,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. They would literally hand it to their buddy and that was running the IT that was incompetent, and then have them do it. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly. I think you're spot on there. And it's just like being able to be conscious of that to make sure that you're showcasing that value to maximize that ROI that you're bringing to the table. But then at the same time, yeah, of fulfilling that capacity or whatnot. And I think it's also important, at least for me, as the way that, I don't know, maybe it's my corporate love language or something, to be appreciated for the things that I'm doing. Because I've worked in organizations where I really felt like they could have cared less for the value that I was doing. They were more concerned of, are you fulfilling in that role? Get back, put your head down. It's not your job to think about other things other than just this one thing here, which I can get in specializing, being good at that. But when you've got, when I know that my value and that I bring to the table exceeds, what I'm doing, and I do pop my head up and raise my hand to offer additional value to the organization, and it's not received as that value or not needed, like, that's fine. It might be and is what it is. I can definitely take my skills elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. Um, and that's the biggest thing too. So it's we always get to where we are in life because of the culmination of experiences and how we respond to things, right? And so it's very easy to be like, hey, because if I knew what I knew now, I would probably still be at my first job and be like a regional manager making okay money. But I can't really speak to that because I don't know if the difference of experiences would necessarily change who I am as a person and like my constant need for change. Right. And I'm sure if they ever got to the point where things got stagnant, that would be force me to kind of get out of that and question like, why am I still here? Why am I giving my life to this company where I'm not finding true fulfillment? And you could be on that side of the table too. But the biggest way that you find necessarily the full fulfillment and you don't burn out is finding stuff that you truly enjoy that you can do. So it's just like, again, if you want to get into shape, you can still eat whatever you want. It's just if you eat more, you also have to work out more. So there's that dynamic of, okay, if I'm eating this much calories, this is how much I have to work out to get the same results that I want. And so I have to do that conscious math problem in my head. It's like, okay, if I want these results in business, like if I'm going to go on vacation, if I'm going to have fun, if I'm going to have a slack day, that means I have to double down my efforts in business on other here. Can I do that? Or is that not sustainable? Right. Or am I going to burn out? Like, and there would be some times in that it's like, okay, in order to do this vacation and finish the project ahead of time to meet these deadline, it means I need to work 72 hours straight, no sleep, just crap tons of pre-workout and energy drinks.
Power through it.
Pretty much the entire diet and get it done. And yes, I did it, but I'd be lying to say that I didn't shave years off my life because of that.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable. You keep doing that crap and you will you're going to have all sorts of health deterioration, all sorts of mental deterioration. It's a bad downward slope that you don't want to go down. So just do a balance. Like, hey, this is realistically what I'm willing to do. This is what I want. And this is what I need to do to make that happen. And I'm passionate about it to make it happen. And just understand that sometimes, like if you want the Greek body, you're going to have to do the crunches you hate.
Right, exactly. And so it's like, I think you've got to be, you've got to have that mindset and be prepared for, while you're doing the things that fulfill you, there are probably aspects of it that don't fulfill you. And what do you do to keep consistent to work through those low spots that aren't fulfilling? But you have to do that to get to the fulfilling side.
Right? You have to understand what that is providing you, or like in business, luckily you can outsource most of those things, right? If you suck at it, if it drains you, if it mentally drains you, physically drains you, everything else, you can usually outsource at least most of that. You'll still have to deal with some of that. Like, I don't like dealing with drama. I don't like dealing with people issues, but being an employer, that's part of it. I can still delegate a little bit of it to the office manager, to the secretary, etc., but it doesn't change. I'm still going to have to deal with some of it. Just like if you're in a job, you're going to have to deal with some unsavory things and that. And those are the things that truly test you on whether you're going to step up to the plate and gain the skill set to overcome it, or you're just in a position that it's not a great fit for you because it just takes way too much out of you. Right?
Yeah.
And that's usually a great indicator that says, hey, you need to change something in your life, whether that's the environment that you're in, whether it's the job entirely, whether it is your mindset, whatever it could be, right? Only you can answer that question at the end of the day. But the thing is we like to lie to ourselves. Like, we always like to lie to ourselves and make excuses. That's like the natural mind or subconscious is we always want to convince ourselves why we're not where we want to be, why we can't do something. And you can come up with, the brain is genius. It will come up with excuses day in and day out without even blinking.
Yes.
And so you have to retrain your mind. And that's the biggest key, is retraining your mind to find solutions instead of problems. So every time you say, I can't, Find 5 different ways that you can make that happen. Oh, I can't do that. I don't have the money. Okay, well, how do I bootstrap this? How do I fund or raise capital? How do I make this happen? How can I reduce my debts and overhead costs to free up other money? There's a lot of ways you can do it. And at the end of the day, all of it is just bullshit and excuses and that to settle for what you have now. And frankly, the life that you have will always be the one that you settled for. That's the reality. It's the same. So take it this way. If you look at statistics, people with more kids have more or make statistically more money. So a lot of people would be like, well, see, having more kids is tied directly to that, to having more income. No, it's not. It's they have the struggle and everything, and they realize that they're not willing to settle for less, so they have enough pain to be willing to be pushed to make more money to sustain that, because we both know kids aren't cheap.
I guess that's why I have 5 kids at the same time,
See, it gives you some of that drive, though. Let's be honest. It probably gave you a little bit of that drive to get where you are in your career.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely does. In fact, there's a friend of mine. He always says, "Man, if I could just make more money, I could spend it on my kids." Tongue in cheek, but I mean, it's not cheap having kids, obviously, but it's that extra drive to succeed, to make sure that needs are met, and for us personally, like, we have goals and dreams and things that we want to accomplish as a family, places we want to go, and experiences we want to have, and no one else is paying for it. Like, we've got to find ways to be able to accomplish things that we want to do.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a real sweet, short, sweet thing. And that there's a couple, again, takeaways for here is build something sustainable, be a problem solver, not a problem creator in your life, and that, and find ways to overcome any of the obstacles in that. And if you really have no obstacles or pain or anything in your life, that means you really have settled a lot.
And there's no growth.
Mediocrity. So push yourself into something uncomfortable. Like, what is the most outlandish thing that you could ever see yourself doing? Throw yourself into it. I don't care if it's skydiving, scuba, or getting up in front of 1,000 people and giving a talk or TED talk or something.
Yeah. Or going live on Facebook for the first time. Right? Like that. Anything.
Simple. Yeah, whatever it could be. Honestly, that is when I've grown the absolute most, is when I've thrown myself into the areas of the highest discomfort.
Absolutely.
Any final closing words for the wise and thoughtful Danny Jessup?
No, that all the above there. Just maybe one thing that you mentioned just a little bit a few minutes ago is that just a thought popped into my mind of the old adage that I judge others on their actions, but I judge myself on my intentions. And so, it's easy to kind of, trick ourselves into, well, I intended to do this, but so-and-so, they did or didn't do that. But if I can kind of get a little bit more refined of what that is, and then taking action on those things and showing up to problems that I have with solutions in mind, because I might not have the best solution, but at least it's going to get that conversation going. I might not be comfortable with dealing with the problem. That's going to put me out of that comfort zone that you talked about. But in leaning into it and finding those solutions, it might take a left turn I had no idea it was going to be there, but I wouldn't have found it unless I leaned into it and got myself out of that comfort zone. So,
right on. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We will catch you on the next podcast. So the week after, I'm not sure it's going to be Dylan and that. I don't think you're probably not going to be able to jump on that one, I'm assuming, and that for tomorrow.
Possibly. It's a kind of crazy time right now.
We'll talk about it later and that instead.
Sounds good.
But if we don't, either way, it's only going to be a week for us, but it'll probably be 2 weeks for you before you see this fine gentleman again. So just drink in the view for a little bit longer if you're watching the video podcasts. Or
oh man, yes.
Well, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you.